about the the artistic process behind? You mentioned your interest in like tile sets with early RPGs and kind of taking those apart and figuring out which textures you like. I mean, there's so many textures in your. Is the thing that really stands out to me is just like the use of texture in these environments. And there, yeah, can you tell me a bit about like your drawing, this kind of like wallpaper, this like wallpaper approach? What is that? What does that look like for you, like process wise?
I guess it's kind of like just a mix of like, I guess part of the appeal to me of making games is that you just kind of get to do all these little things kind of by themselves, You're always just like heaping things up. Like, I'll just have a day where like, okay, this is the writing day. This is the daydreaming day. This is the draw with little guys day. This is like the wallpaper day. And it'll just be kind of like a fun challenge. Just be like, I'm going to spend an hour. I'll look at like old wallpaper samples. Like, I have this really good book, which is like a collection of, poisonous wallpapers from the Victorian era, like the ones they made with arsenic paint in them. And there's like this whole thing about, William Morris of all people was just like, oh, this is ridiculous. There's no way that people can get poisoned by the wallpaper. And immediately to just dropping like guys because there's one particular shade of green that was in this poisonous fucking wallpaper. A lot of it was like, a lot of it is kind of too elaborate for me to like hand draw, like replicate, but like, yeah, just like finding like weird ideas or like references or stuff like that I can just kind of pull from. And also being like the Dario Argento kind of giallo thing of like, it's one thing to have like a guy stabbing a woman. It's another thing to have a guy stabbing a woman in front of like the craziest like wallpaper you've ever seen. It's like kind of distracting and drowning out the scene. I always like that like sensibility of just like, yeah, there's no reason not to give people something interesting to look at. Like something interesting to look at should always be like in addition to the thing that's like meant to be happening. I like to do like, because that's how I always feel like if you're being stabbed with a knife or something like that, you'd be, the part of you which would be like screaming in fear, and then there'd be another part which is kind of really intensely focused on like, geez, look at that wallpaper pattern or something like that. There's always like an excess of like visual detail that like you're kind of always drowning in, or always like trying to filter out or trying to navigate. So it's kind of funny to have that as almost like a threat, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with games because like the traditional wisdom would be that like the use of like color or like should always be directed towards like some specific like game design and like an exit or to guide the player along. And you seem to in some ways like sort of reject that, and like these colors can exist like under own. I spent a lot of time like walking through spaces, and it's not that the colors don't necessarily have to indicate some sort of like specific game design principle. It's just like they are, or a level design kind of principle. It's more like they can just sort of exist as these like really interesting textures like on their own. Unless I'm reading this wrong.
No, there's I mean,
yeah.
Actually, I think there is something I read a while back. Some design notes by the developer of that game, Skin Deep. The kind of the most scene that came out a while back, and they're mentioning how I think they mentioned there's some like kind of an economy, or like a limit on the amount of things they wanted to have, like fighting for the player's attention at one time.
Yeah.
Which makes a lot more sense in their game because it's a lot more systemic and dense. Whereas in mine, it's just like, there's not a lot strictly going on, and I can kind of stage manage what's going on, right? I can add new things or take them in. I can, a lot of it is kind of walking out corridors. So there's no sense like, I'm totally going to make this on table if I make the wallpapers two-way. It's just like, yeah, like you're walking down the corridor. So because that base is always there, it's always like such a simple kind of like basic gameplay level, you kind of have total free reign when it comes to, you can just put in any degree of, with wallpapers, distracting paintings, like corporates, odd text, sound effects, things like that. I guess distraction is kind of like the goal I'm shooting for rather than the accidental thing I'm trying to avoid,
Yeah.